started at a stock futures exchange and then an investment bank where I was doing software engineering. And while there, they opened an investigation into an international money laundering case. And through software, I'd helped them identify where it was taking place and prove that it was happening. And I kind of had an aha moment that this was really cool and you could use software to find bad people and make the world a better place. One of the big misconceptions is to take the most known, popularized, most interesting adversaries and saying, we're going to emulate that. We're going to test our org against that. And that'll be, we're good if we can just fit that. It may not be what you deal with at all. It might just be like, are you really going to get hit by this nation state actor? It could be ransomware. That's really who you need to emulate. There's insider threat where someone's acting very maliciously, but there's also a lot that is a risk to security just by thought of as benign use within the browser, but data might be leaking or files getting transferred, and there's a big risk there.
Today, I'm joined by William Booth, General Manager and Director of MITRE ATT&CK Evaluations. William leads the industry standard program that helps organizations understand how security tools perform against real-world threat behaviors. Before taking the helm of the ATT&CK Evaluations program, Will led MITRE's Caldera project, one of their most successful initiatives focused on adversary emulation. William and MITRE's work has fundamentally changed how we evaluate security effectiveness in the security industry, and I'm excited to hear more from him. Thanks for joining us on the Be Fearless podcast, William.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
Great.
Yes. Thanks for that great intro.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, let's start with your security journey. How did you get into the field? I understand you pivoted from software engineering to security. Would love to hear, the story behind that. How did you go from software engineering to security?
Yeah, it's maybe a unusual beginning into it. So I started at a stock futures exchange and then an investment bank where I was doing software engineering. And while there, they opened an investigation into a money laundering case, an international money laundering case. And through software, I'd helped them identify where it was taking place and prove that it was happening. And I kind of had an aha moment that this was really cool and you could use software to find bad people and make the world a better place, as corny as it sounds. But that sort of led me to a 90-degree turn into cybersecurity, still taking all that software engineering background and applying it to just a different domain.
Wow. So you were a programmer at this investment bank, right?
Yep.
Like you said, there was a money laundering, activity going on. And when you say you use software to help you find it, did you create like forensic software, or was it good logging in the software, or what was it that,
It was all those things. There's a lot of the same things in security. It was taking all of that sort of the telemetry, so to speak, of the trades, the patterns, where they were originating from, connecting them together, and then showing over time how that progressed, each trade, and how they were essentially taking losses or gains to move money into the U.S. and to move it out.
Wow.
And it was cool because you couldn't really see it if you're just looking at the sea of data. But then when you started to organize it and correlate it, you could start to see a really evident pattern. And that led to their charges, but they were foreign nationals, so I don't think there was ever a conviction on it. But it was really cool to be a part. And it wasn't in my wheelhouse at the time. It was just something I was helping with, and then it was like, this is really cool.
Yeah, I know. It sounds like forensic accounting in a way. I don't know.
Yes, exactly.
And funny thing is that like my first degree plan in cybersecurity was accounting.
Interesting. Yeah.
Accounting, right. And then of course I'd been working with computers for a long time. So it really never kind of stuck. I was always way more interested in computers than I was into accounting. And then, when I went to get my master's, I was first going to go get into finance. And then as one of my friends from McKinsey told me, he's like, of course you did, because finance is the most like computer science, right? So, so, but yeah, I mean, I think completely interesting story. I mean, it sounds somewhat genius, the fact that they were using the margins between the buys and the sells to like carve out more money so that they could move it. I mean, it's genius activity, I would think.
Yeah.
Almost reminds me of that Superman movie with Richard Pryor, where they just needed parts of a penny and then.
Yeah. I mean, sort of. And it was on these, what they consider sort of exotic derivatives. So, there's a lot of complication in there. I mean, on the surface, I think it's fairly straightforward, kind of in it. But yeah, they were using this, and yeah, it was a really smart way to do it. But they got caught.
Not smart enough, I guess.
Yeah.
Right. So, well, anyway, I think it is an interesting pivot, right? But I think that one of the things that I think is interesting, and another kind of like how cyber kind of mimics other industries, is that we do have like a sea of data, right? We have, people talk about data lakes and have all this information that go into these logging systems that we use to figure out whether an adversary is on the network and everything else. And it's, it kind of feels like, it's a little bit more complicated than I think, buy and sell transactions in a finance market, but it's similar in like you have a whole lot of data and you're trying to sift through it to see that there's patterns of activity or anomalous patterns of activity that, you might be, in the finance world might be a buy signal. In the, cybersecurity world, it might be a insider risk signal or some other actor on your environment. Right. So but it's very similar to me. I was actually involved in like an algorithmic trading platform.
Oh yeah.
In 2011, 2012. And for me, it was very similar in activity between like doing, behavioral analysis, kind of, regression testing and those kinds of things in cyber with what I was doing with this algorithmic trading platform. But then, no, it's super interesting that it's a great story. But now you're the general manager and director of MITRE ATT&CK evaluations.
Yes.
Tell me about your role there, and what is the ATT&CK evaluation program?
Yeah, so the ATT&CK evaluations program, it's really, brass tacks testing of these cybersecurity tools. In some sense, they're kind of these like experience goods. It's really hard when you go to buy a cybersecurity tool to understand what its effectiveness is before you go through an incident or you go through an event and really see how well it was actually would protect you. What we do is we take what is a real life scenario and we run it through a test, and then we provide that data to the public so they can make more informed decisions. We also provide those, all parts of the methodology, everything we did for the test, so that others can recreate it, and there's transparency around there. The other thing that we do is we work with each of the vendors that participate to help them improve. So where we see things, either the things that are public as part of the evaluation, or we see as just even part of the installation, the setup, and the kind of pre-flight checks, things that we notice, we in turn help them provide better insights so that they could make improvements to their tool. One of the other things that we do, which is cool, unique position for MITRE, is there's a lot of research that happens at MITRE, a lot of forward-thinking horizon research, and so it's also a way to help push the industry as well on topics that maybe are more of a checkbox, and we can kind of prove that or draw focus to it. Mm-hmm. And it's been going for since about 2018. I didn't start it; it was Frank Duff who initially started this program. But happy to be on board and happy to have add some additional new things from last round, and some new exciting things for this round too.
When I think about as a CISO, because I've been CISO 3 times and bought a lot of software. I think that when I am talking to vendors, right, everyone's kind of telling me, hey, what can they do? These are gaps that I have or potentially have in my environment and such. But I really kind of feel like I'm going to Home Depot, and trying to pull together a defense strategy, build this house out of just things that are just around at Home Depot. So I'm taking pieces and parts from everywhere. And I think what I liked, I remember when attack evaluations came out, there was so much confusion in the marketplace about which software to use with respect to, and mostly around the EDR product set is what I remember how it came out initially. And it was great having a resource that I could look at and just be concrete about, does it detect this? Does it not detect this? And, I think that when it came, like you said, I think it came out like in 2018 time period, something like that. It was at Expedia, and we were evaluating EDR vendors and managed service providers and stuff so that we could, kind of tell what was going on. And I had a particular attack that had been successful in my environment that drew a lot of red flags for me. And, using the evaluations, I was kind of able to kind of narrow down, threats that I was seeing to what it is in tactics that were being performed with what it was that was, the products were able to do. And then it helped me have better conversations with the vendors as well.
Yes.
So I think that the attack evaluations was incredibly useful for people that are listening to this podcast and, don't know attack evaluations and such. I think there's probably a good learning opportunity to kind of take a look at what's going on there and seeing how these things map. But it's not just hey, how many of these tick boxes does it hit? Right. Because every vendor is going to have things that they focus on. It's not just this one has 77 TTPs, right? This one has 80, so it must be better. It's not quite like that from an evaluation perspective. And I think that kind of thinking about what you were doing at Caldera and, what you're doing at evaluations. I mean, if you were, someone learning in the industry and you're thinking about adversaries and their TTPs and emulating them, and then how does this fit into the attack evaluations? You must have a really good story about how that fits together with respect to a defense strategy.
Yes. And that's one of the things that we try to focus on. And, maybe we can get into this a little bit more later on kind of a selection of adversary piece, but that's, it is trying to fit what are these use cases, like you're saying at Expedia, that you're focused on, and, how does that play out within your organization? It's a bit of a challenge for us because we have such a broad audience here, and trying to make sure that it has some sort of, relevance and to everybody. But we do try to find those ones that are going to be relatable, that you can actually use, that even if you're not using the full end-to-end testing of it, that you can take those key aspects of it, key chains, and say how and dig into it, full transparency on everything that we're doing, including the CTI that went into it, and be able to fully understand that and see, hey, where can I make some improvements within your own setup.
Right. When you're thinking about you have the MITRE ATT&CK framework, and I think that's probably your go-to for TTPs to emulate. I always think of MITRE as a neutral party, right? They may be funded by the government, but I don't feel like they're funded by the vendors, right? So it's, then there's a lot of research that comes out of MITRE that are, I kind of think of MITRE as like a think tank that kind of helps us with our defense industry, base in the US. Is that a good way of thinking about MITRE?
So MITRE does so many things. They are in essence like that. They are a federally funded research and development center, similar to Jet Propulsion Lab, Los Alamos, Oak Ridge. There's a lot. One of the interesting things about MITRE's focus in the cybersecurity areas, it is one that very much benefits everybody. And with attack evaluations, it's not just the U.S. It is we have participants from all over the world, and our focus is how can we make security better for everybody. I mean, that is the mission there. And so while there is that connection, our focus is what threats is the public facing that we can in some way help improve or make a little bit safer. But yeah, there is at its core, MITRE is set up in that way.
Okay. Yeah. Because I think the reason why I was saying that is because, and thanks for clarifying, is that, is that, there's a lot of research that MITRE does. That research flows into the MITRE attack. And then, from an evaluations perspective, you're continuing that work from that perspective, right? So as new research is present, and like you said, there might be new research that shows up that you're going to be talking to vendors about, so that they can, kind of plan for, future evaluations as the MITRE attack kind of grows, right? Based on what's being seen and what could be happening in the environment. I guess as you're going through evaluation cycles, what factors go into selecting which TTPs that you're trying to evaluate in your evaluation cycles? Is it everything, and it's just everything that's there, or is it is it prioritized and like most likely to hit you, or how do you
I think the team would like, all of us would like to do everything. Obviously, there's some logistical boundaries to doing that. We start with what is relevant and what is prevalent. We base it on a attack, the framework, which, one of its core philosophy points is that it's, observed behavior. So it's not looking at necessarily hypothetical attacks, but real attacks that have occurred. When we go to select the adversary, there's a couple things that go into it. What are trends that are happening? What are things that, there are things that maybe are continued trends, but that they've been sort of tested before. And maybe it's just that those defenses just need to be implemented, and that's why they're being successful. Or is it a new method or a new approach? But we very much start with, what's been observed? What are these trends? And then there's, different categories of adversaries. There's the APT type adversary, which might have very focused objectives, and that may not be applicable to everybody. And then you also have the kind of the cyber criminal type objective, and so in the last one we did one of each, and similarly as we look forward in this year is, how can we address both of those categories? If you're a large organization, you're a government entity, globally, maybe you're a journalist, and maybe some of those advanced persistent threats, those nation state actors are more focused on targeting those types of groups. And maybe it's the cyber criminal side, and you're maybe a smaller organization and you're getting hit by these ransomware attacks. And so we try to blend those two, but still very much is based in that core of attack in the framework.
Right. Yeah. So I mean, when you were saying it, what I kept thinking is, threat informed defense, right? Yes. I think this is another thing that kind of gets missed in the industry, is that for me, there's two parts to it. And I'm expect that my nomenclature is not exactly correct here, but I do think of things in terms of risks and threats.
Yes.
And for me, a threat is something that I've observed that I've actually seen, and that is happening on my network. For whatever reason, my defense strategy is working or not working. It has everything to do with the threats that are attacking me and what they're finding that are working or not working on my network, right? So those are observations. And for me, risks are things that could happen, but I haven't seen an observation of it, right? It's like I may know about a gap in my security posture in this part of my network, but I don't see anything over there. So it's a risk because something could happen over there. It's plausible, but I'm not really seeing things. So for me, I kind of focus on observations and things that I'm seeing that are gaps in my defense strategy, and then I'm focusing on addressing those. And
we very much look at it similarly, and that's actually one of the challenges where. Particularly as we look at cloud, which is one of the topics for this upcoming evaluation, is we know it's a big risk. There's some threats out there. And so because we're basing it off of known adversaries, known behaviors, those known threats, how do we approach addressing the risk part of it when we might have limited information on the threat side? That's also very much the case in ICS too, where we know that there are big risks, but maybe the threat is not as established yet. But we have high confidence that this is a pattern that's increasing, a trend that's happening. And so it is one of the difficulties in doing an evaluation. And then there's other times where both of those are very large, like ransomware, where the risk is still there, the threat is known, we pair them up and we do the evaluation.
Right. We'd love to talk to you more about ransomware, because I just keep wondering, why do we continue to have a problem with ransomware when we've known about it so long? And I think there are a lot of theories, but maybe that's another show. But when security vendors perform well in attack evaluations, what aspects are they excelling at, and what are we learning from them? I mean, because it's kind of like, you kind of said, okay, there's like the APT kind of evaluation, there's some criminal evaluations, and then we're throwing all these vendors into this threat informed observations that we're testing them against. So when they're doing well, when they're excelling in there, what are they excelling at? What are they doing well?
Yes. Doing well is, in a sense, sort of relative. I would, at a core, at a base, say that any vendor who is participating, whether that be in attack evaluations or any third-party testing, is doing well. I think that is, we can get a little lost in the sauce of this person, this org had, or this participant had 98 detections, this one had 99 detections, therefore better. Okay, maybe. But just simply participating, I think, is like a really strong step and statement from a lot of organizations. In terms of doing well, I think that can be on many different facets. There's things that we observe and we report on, and then there's other areas too. You can have 100% detection, nothing gets by. But like last time, we introduced the false positive piece and the volume piece. So, all other things equal, yes, you might have the same number of detections, but what's the trade-off there? Is it maybe price, which we don't necessarily cover? Is it false positive? Is it volume? And doing well can be dependent on the organization. You might be an organization where, look, I need to detect everything. I need to protect everything at the expense of many false positives or a lot of volume. I'll eat the cost. I'll do that. Or maybe that's not something that you can take on. And hey, this has a core coverage of what I need. It's got low false positives, low volume, and this really works for my organization. Those are both, I think, doing well. And so, yeah.
Yeah. So I think you said that really well, is that these are going to depend on your particular use cases as an enterprise or whatever it is that you're defending, right? And what your budget is and how you're going to approach the problems, or how is it that your board, for better or worse, how much do they want to invest in this program? And if we can push a lot of observables into the space so that we have an opportunity to see something. But if you don't have enough people or you don't have the right technology to make sense out of that, then your SOC analysts and your incident response people are going to be very busy handling a lot of, kind of get into the alert fatigue kind of mode.
Yes.
But that is a trade-off, right? There is a trade-off in having incredible visibility versus, hey, I know that this is something that you need to look at. And then, maybe that's a trade-off and you might miss some things. But, again, I want to make sure that folks, as they're looking at evaluations, that they're not thinking of a scorecard of how many things that they need to detect. I think false positives and volumetric numbers make a huge impact to it. And then again, you're evaluating a certain set of tools that are part of your entire defense strategy. They're not the entire defense strategy. It's an important component today in certain kinds of use cases, but depending on what you're doing as a business, you got to really think about like how that whole thing kind of puts together. It's not kind of like you pick one tool and there you go, you're done.
Yes.
They're actually, that's the technology part of it, but you also have people and process parts of it. You have data, you have other
culture, organization, compliance,
many aspects that are required to build defense strategy. So anyways, so kind of come into that. It's like, what misconceptions do you commonly see about adversary emulation and its role in security testing?
Yeah, I think so. Adversary emulation is very specific, and I think it oftentimes gets conflated with pen testing like a known adversary. Adversary emulation really starts with a lot of the threat intelligence research, really understanding that adversary and really understanding how that adversary plays in with your own organization, taking that threat-informed defense approach. So even just the selection of which adversary to emulate is one of the key steps. And part of that is to know what your organization is, know what the infrastructure you have, what industry are you in, what geography are you in. All these things play into just even beginning the adversary emulation component. I think a lot of one of the big misconceptions is to take the most known, popularized, most interesting adversaries and saying we're gonna emulate that, we're gonna test our org against that, and that'll be, we're good if we can just fit that. It may not be what you deal with at all. It might just be like, are you really going to get hit by this nation state actor? It could be, but might be ransomware. That's really who you need to emulate. So I think that's really one part of it. And then once you have that adversary selected, how are you going through and implementing those tactics, techniques, and procedures? What I often see is you have this adversary, and you have this beautiful attack matrix of the scope of the adversary. And you say, okay, I've got this particular technique. Let me just go find an implementation of it, and then I'm going to recreate that. But you have to really know the adversary to know if the adversary would do that. Or is it just a collection of loosely tied TTPs that fill it? So there's a lot of part of that. And so I think that CTI piece is the biggest part that is generally missing from it. And then that last part too with the adversary emulation is, what do you do at the end of it? I don't feel that it's done to just simply emulate the adversary, despite it being called adversary emulation. I think you need to actually take those lessons, do an implementation of it, and then retest. And that kind of continuous testing gets you to a really strong implementation of adversary emulation. And it's not easy. And it's not that everybody should be doing it. It's a very intensive piece. And it's why, a program like Attack Evaluations, where we can pull that, do it together, and provide it online for free, is a great resource, because it is so intensive to do.
Right. And I think you're spot on. I think, this often when I see people talk about adversary emulation, I see that same gap, the one where they're not really thinking about, they're seeing what's in the news, and they're seeing that, hey, there's a lot of chatter about this particular thing in the news. And they kind of run that test, like how well does our stuff perform against that? Or if they're going to, or they're asking all their vendors, hey, how do you perform against this? This is in the news. But often I think it's exactly that. It's like, what is it about your business? And going back to strategic kind of threat intelligence, what is your business? What business are you in? What is it that you have a value, right? What's valuable to either an APT or a criminal actor, or even, does your CEO have a good reputation or a bad reputation? Because you could have hacktivists that are attacking you for whatever reason. Right. And then, but then saying, okay, given those things that we have to protect, these crown jewels, what's important to us, whether, could be whatever it is. It could be your intellectual property. It could be that you have a great e-commerce store, so you have lots of valuable information about customers and credit card information and whatever. There's lots of things that could be valuable at your company. Who is interested in that? Who is interested in value that your company is driving to the criminal organizations or the APTs or whoever? You got to know. There's got to be some sort of relationship there, and then. Yeah. If you can say that there's a good, strong correlation, those actors are working my industry, they are targeting, my same value chain that I have for my business, then that's probably a good adversary to emulate.
Yes.
Right. As opposed to just, whatever's in the news. Right.
100%. And, we see it too. It's the infrastructure will play a part into it. If your organization maybe has, a lot of distributed employees or contractors. And so you have a lot of kind of bring your own device, or maybe these are a lot of unmanaged devices that are being brought into the ecosystem. That presents a different front and a different risk than a different style of organization. All that said, I would say that, doing a test is likely going to be better than not doing testing any at all. And, I don't want to over-index on this massive analysis and get this, the analysis paralysis piece. But if you can take the time at the very front to do that and just, even if it's a quick conversation of this is kind of the objectives, this is what our crown jewels are, this is how we're our organization geography, how does that align? So going to do a scorecard real quick on this adversary. And then, if they're close, just choose one, don't go crazy, but do fit it to, your own organization. Yeah,
exactly. I was going to say, it's like, this shouldn't be a multi-month journey to figure out how to do your first test.
Yeah.
It's something that if you get a couple of people in the room, y'all understand the business. Maybe you've been at the company for 3 months or 6 months. You don't have to have been there for years, but you can kind of figure out what the business does. And in an afternoon, 2 or 3 hours, come up with a good adversary to emulate. I mean, like, let's, like you said, let's time box this. It's like, if you're for your first one, if you're spending more than 3 hours doing it, you're spending too much time doing it.
Yeah. But a little thought goes a long way. Do they only target Eastern Europe? Okay,
Yeah.
well, then maybe do one that's targeting where your organization is. Are you in Southeast Asia? Okay, well,
Right.
look at something that's targeting that area.
Yeah. I think like one of the hardest thing to do the first time is create a report, do that work, show how it worked, what didn't work. And then you'll have plenty of people to give you advice once they see your report.
Yes.
They will help you with your next evaluation cycle altogether, because everyone can throw stones at work. It's harder to create the work. So, time box it, get the adversary emulation place, report on it, make sure that people are seeing it. And then they'll give you plenty of advice of what you missed and what you didn't think about, and what part of the business they think is important and stuff like that. And your next evaluation will be even better.
Yes.
So, the important thing is to get started. So is there anything that you think I missed with respect to attack evaluations or?
No, I think attack evaluations, it's interesting because we are a nonprofit and, we run very lean, and our main focus is, we are all technical staff. And so I think often too, when I get kind of inbound requests about understanding attack evaluations and the results that we provide, a lot of it starts with, hey, I have this ad. Is this correct? And it starts there from the marketing aspect, which I think is fine. I love it. I do see a lot of creativity and a lot of enthusiasm on the marketing front. I think that's good. I mean, I think it's signaling what they're interested in. It's showing that they've gone into the crucible and come out and they've got something that they can show for it. But do take a look at not just the claim there, but also what's the data to support it behind it.
Yeah, I think just on that point, I think that from my observation, I've never been in a environment. Well, yeah, the closest that I came to being an environment that was just Windows laptops was actually doing work with the U.S. Navy. I had an environment that everything was a Windows computer that our users were using. I didn't have any really Macs or Linux boxes of any note. I would have 20,000 Windows boxes and maybe 2 or 3 Linux boxes or something. But I think in commercial space, we do have a lot of Macs out there. We do have a lot of Linux systems that are out there. And you're looking into those evaluations and seeing what was being tested. You got to look at the details, right? Because a lot of capabilities that people are working on work really great on Windows. But once you get into some of the other operating systems and other kinds of environment, the effectiveness starts to drop. And but in real commercial environments, you do have a mix of systems that need to be looked at, and the evaluations don't necessarily mean that everything that you can do on Windows you can do on a Mac or you can do on Linux. There's actually lots and lots of variations, especially on Linux, on the kernels and what the kernels are configured at and what versions of the operating system. Not all the capabilities that you would expect to have in and your technology that's running on your system, your EDRs, your antivirus, or whatever, are actually available on every platform. So do take a look at the evaluations and make sure that your mix matches the mix that was tested. And if you don't, then you actually have a framework that you can look at so that you can do your own testing for your own environment, for your own systems that you can mimic. Like you said, it's about repeatability, right? Being transparent is making it so it's repeatable, and you're not going to be able to test everything that might be out there. But if you have some time and this Linux environment is incredibly important to you, then take the time to look at your research and your reporting and say, hey, how do I test that in my own environment?
Yeah, one of the best, I think, compliments that we got from last year was essentially we were frustrated you chose to do Mac, and our Mac users have never been better protected. And I was like, that's awesome, because that's what we try to do, is put a spotlight on it, and push some of that, those resources forward on that. And I do think that, like you're saying, that these environments are, there's all different things coming into it. And so to be able to focus and like push on, say, Mac, which that was very interesting and revealing. And similarly for this time as cloud, it's much more complicated, but I hope that'll be a similar type comment at the end of the year.
Yeah. So, so I was reading this recent HelpNet security interview with you, and you mentioned an interesting phrase, checkbox security. So beyond mere regulatory compliance, and what other metrics can we use to meaningfully evaluate a security program's effectiveness and drive organizations towards the right behaviors?
Yes. So, yeah, I think the compliance piece is a really good step. And those, what's going into it is getting more comprehensive. But there are still so many other factors that go into security. Some of the things that we've talked about already. What is that analyst experience? What is the workload there? So there are other pieces to this of, in some aspects, it's a cost too to do security. So those other metrics on even false positive or volume, or those are very interesting metrics to look at that compliance isn't going to cover, that can help drive that efficiency, the effectiveness of a program. So I think looking at some of those pieces is really important and not to miss.
Yeah, I think that my experience with the Navy outside continental U.S. Was that compliance drove budgets, right? Meaning that there would be a new regime that we had to be in compliance with, and I'm not talking about PCI or anything like that, but it's like, hey, DISA came out with a new set of guidelines on how to protect whatever, and then or we wanted to increase our effectiveness in our global SOC operations or whatever we were doing. But what would happen would be that the money, we'd say, this is what we want to do. And then the money would come to deliver the technology to do that, right? But then the training of it and how you use it and everything else, that would come afterwards, right? And I think that when people are thinking about compliance and security, I think they're incredibly interlinked. Right. But security is an outcome, right? You're trying to achieve an objective. Compliance is, you're also trying to achieve that objective. I think that they're trying to achieve security objectives with respect to compliance, and like having these minimum things that you've got to demonstrate, show you that you're on that path, but it doesn't mean you're getting the security outcome yet. Right. You know what I mean? But
yep. It's kind of a denominator of, practices, and not all of them, it is, because it's a standard, it's not individualized. It doesn't account for the differences we've talked about. Every organization is different. So it's a good step. It can sometimes not be a perfect fit there. And then, like you're saying too, is, what else beyond that to actually be secure, to be as defended as you can, given your resources against that threat.
Right. Yeah. I mean, because it's a lot of like what I think compliance is the way I think about it is like, how do you defend yourself in a courtroom with what you did or what you didn't do?
Yeah.
And it's
or insurance or
yeah, it's about insurance and legal liabilities and those kinds of things. It doesn't mean it's driving the outcomes that your business actually wants to achieve, but it's definitely look, if you don't have the investments happening at all,
yes,
then that's a terrible place to be.
Yeah.
Being in a place where you have investments and you have those compliance and you hit those checkpoints, that's great too. But you really got to be thinking about your business and about what's important and where you're going to invest, not the technology, not this, but your people, processes, and what data you're collecting. There's lots of other things that you need to be thinking about when you're thinking about your defense.
Yes, beyond just checking that and saying, "Oh."
Beyond just checking it, but I know my GRC counterparts would say, "No, we do important work."
Oh, 100%. Yes, there's a lot of thought that goes into it. It's
absolutely, absolutely. But again, I think it does make it difficult to evaluate your program's effectiveness. I mean, you've got to get to the compliance level. You've got to get there. You got to get to that point. I think that's incredibly important. The way that I always think about it is, if you and I opened up a pizza shop, the first adversary that I have isn't actually going to be someone robbing me, right? It's actually going to be the government coming and checking to make sure I'm washing the dishes correctly and those kinds of things. They're going to say, can you comply to health standards at your pizza shop? If you can, then you can continue to operate. You get an opportunity to do business. Yeah. That's the way I think of compliance. It's like, can you do the bare minimum that you can do? That doesn't mean that that the compliance officer required you to have cameras or guns behind your desk to defend against a robber. And I'm not saying hack back and attack the robbers, right?
But to your point is, like, you can hit these things and for safety, but that's not a well-protected pizza shop in this
exactly. And it's not going to prevent you from fraud or someone, not putting all the money in the till and all those things that, are also other risks that you have in your business. But, you definitely need to be able to have, your safety concerns and the bare minimum requirements so that you can continue to operate the business in there. Right.
Yep.
But, again, kind of going back to that, we kind of get through the compliance. We talked about compliance a lot, but if you were measuring the effectiveness of a program, what would be your measures? I mean, do you have measures that you think about or that you think are important from your perspective?
That's a pretty expansive question. I think it does depend on your sort of maturity level too. And I think you kind of talked about with the compliance thing. Like if you're not in compliance, like that's the the first metric and the first step to do. Going beyond that, a lot of it is that continuous improvement, that relative improvement. So if you do the adversary emulation and you take note of how well you did, and then being able to repeat that and showing what is the delta, what is that change that you've implemented to better protect, or on that the focus that you've done. I think that's where you can start to get into like specific metrics for where you're at. Of it might be how many unmanaged devices do we have? It can be a different metric based on where you're at. So hard to say, kind of broadly, but I think through doing those tests, taking a focus on one area that you want to improve, that can help get to be in a much better position fairly quickly. Yeah. Sort of the what gets measured gets managed type
right.
Approach.
Whatever that is, right? And I think the most important thing is kind of figuring out what your business thinks is important, right? As cybersecurity professionals, I think that we kind of miss the fact that we're defending a business and defending its operational capabilities, right? It's like, how do they make money? How do they deliver value? It's like, we got to protect the engine that keeps us funded. If you want to be kind of selfish about it, how do we keep ourselves funded? And a business that goes out of operations isn't one that's going to fund a security program. No. What's important to the business? Start figuring out like things that you can do to help there. And I love what you said. It's continuous evaluation on something that you care about, right?
Yeah.
Like you said, unmanaged devices. It could be unmanaged devices. That would be a great metric especially if you were dealing with outsourced services and such, and you want to get things into some sort of control. That might be a great metric for your business. And then, but continuously showing the delta is, I think, what you want to show. And, how much money did it cost for you to go from 1 to 3 and 3 to 10 and 10 to 25, whatever that number is, then you can start getting a feel for, is this investment worthwhile?
Yep.
If you're going from 97 to 98 and it costs you $1 million every time to go from that, and you're just inching up, that may not be where you want to spend your money anymore. You might want to go shift your focus somewhere else. So again, I think the message I'm hearing from you is that measuring your program's effectiveness is really about continuous evaluation of a metric that's important to the business. Right?
Yeah.
From our perspective, we're seeing that browser-based attacks are getting more sophisticated. We're seeing malicious extensions that are available. We're seeing a lot of OAuth scope kind of problems that are being, going between different SaaS apps. I know that there are some in the attack framework, there are some browser specific dimensions there, but in your attack evaluations, is there any browser specific dimensions that you're thinking about?
Yeah. So there's, last round we introduced, even with evals, there's been sort of maturity, right? At first it was really on just detect or not detect. And then it was sort of getting more into the specificity of the attack. There's also things we've added, like last round was the false positive and volume piece. One of the false positive piece, was a lot of that kind of web traffic aspect to it, through the browser. As we look at the, cloud as a focus for the next round, a lot of that can be accessed, through command line, but also through the browser. And so you're kind of opening up this huge gateway into a lot of different, exposure there. So it has been incorporated sort of in the noise piece. I think what's going to be interesting is as, you talk about the malicious extensions, there's also the kind of protective extensions too that a lot of companies have. And then we also seen, there's companies that are having like a pure security browser itself, that they're either using internally or offering for use externally. So it's not by design focused in on that, but it will be, it can be a part of the environment. It is a channel through which all these attacks happen. I'm trying to not cover what's happening in the future evaluation, but it'll be interesting to see where those play into. There is some aspect of consistency within environments and doing an evaluation. That's one of that consistency fairness piece. So there will be some challenges as different companies bring to market their own browser for use within like a secure browser. I think that'll be kind of interesting when it's a bit more prevalent.
Yeah, I think that like, from my experience, right, a couple of things that were surprising to me was, one, how much like shadow SaaS there is in the world, right? What I could do to kind of understand what's going on inside my browsers. I think that was kind of a big surprise to me as well, because I think that there's some good work that's being done on Windows with, if you're using Microsoft Edge and you're using a certain kind of stack. I think that was, that was probably okay to some degree. But then when, like again, my environments have never been one single operating system. So I usually had like Macs or Linux boxes and such as well. But then all of a sudden my visibility in those environments went down a lot, and people seem to use Microsoft Edge on a Linux box for whatever reason. On the Shadow SaaS part, I felt like we had a pretty good coverage, and, we had like 230 apps that were part of our SSO and our MFA and conditional access policies and all that kind of stuff. But then I had like 600 apps that were not, that I didn't even know about. And then I, started seeing that we're spending a lot of time in the browser. I mean, even us doing this today, we're inside of a browser, and it's amazing how powerful a browser is today and how many apps we access for it. And then because of SaaS and cloud, there's just so many applications that are being made available to us in SaaS through the browser. It's kind of crazy how much time we spend in a browser. And then I think that, when you look at the attacks that are occurring, I was reading the M Trends from Mandiant report. I don't know. I'm sure you've consumed that multiple times already in the last month. But it's like, I feel like 60% of the attacks that are happening actually traverse the browser. Things that they're doing instant responses are actually started with inside the browser. And it's great that we have tools that can detect exploitation or installation inside the operating system. But for me, I want to see it kind of shift left and not come to my environment. I want to make sure that my data is not moving between my personal, Gmail and my corporate environments or my corporate environment back to personal Chat GPT for summarization. It's like being able to see like those activities that are happening in the browser that may never, ever touch your endpoint.
Yeah. Never touch disk. There's, and that was, the piece too. There's the kind of external threats and attacks. But you also have to think about these kind of the internal risks too, and not necessarily even intentionally malicious, but just that data loss prevention. That I want to, yes, there's insider threat where someone's acting very maliciously, but there's also a lot that is a risk to security just by thought of as benign use within the browser, but data might be leaking or files getting transferred, and there's a big risk there. But I think that's going to be important. I see that trend happening with certain companies with browser extension. Yes, now full browser being released, and I think we'll see more of that.
Okay, good. Because I think that's one of the things that I think is missing in people's evaluations today is that if you have to think that most of the information that we get as buyers is coming from the vendors themselves, right? They're usually telling us about what they can do well, right? And then it's very few organizations, and again, you have to get to a certain threshold of employees and revenue and that kind of stuff to have a program that's big enough that you're going to handle more security problems that your company might have. Small business, this would be really difficult for a small and medium business to do their own evaluations of their software in their particular environments. But what I'm trying to do is bring more focus to, hey, look at what's going on in your browser. Do you have the right kind of security? And there's lots of different ways of securing it. And there's lots of different kind of risk appetites that you might have. And you're going to have to, kind of figure that out on your own as a company to figure out, like, if you're going to make investments here, or you're going to just wait till you have it on disk and you can actually see it on your systems. But most companies today, because it's just so fast and inexpensive to deploy a new SaaS solution, it's incredibly easy. And then the ease of adoption that the SaaS apps allow you to go from one version and start to have integrations inside their ecosystems, they make it easier to just, link them up. There's a massive amount of data and intellectual property that are traversed in the browser. Again, those aren't going to hit the disk. The EDR tools are not looking inside and inspecting what's going on inside of an individual app, right?
And I think you bring up an important point too. Attack evaluation, sort of the big one, is the enterprise evaluation. We also do the managed services evaluation, and that's also a good place. And we focus more on when we think about the threat as a smaller organization, smaller footprint. And that's also a good place too, is yes, doing full adversary emulation, doing these, it does require a certain size, a certain maturity, but if that's not where someone's at, there's a lot of managed services that are there too that can help bring that expertise in quickly. And maybe it's full service, maybe it's supplementing, maybe you start to take on certain parts and manage certain, but that's also a place too where, very quickly you can get a lot of visibility, a lot of coverage, and kind of overnight help improve your security posture by having somebody else come in and also help see what you're not seeing.
Absolutely. And I think that, again, for small and medium businesses that don't have, huge security budgets that can do a lot of things, it's like, look at the evaluations. And if you you can invest the research into Linux systems or whatever, kind of crazy things your users might want. You might have to make a executive decision, say, we're just going to use these platforms because we at least have some data about how these systems performed in evaluation, and then we can get the benefit of that research, not having to do our own research. But then you might have to make an executive decision to say, we're only going to use Windows. We're only going to use it in these things. We're going to use this, that, and the other thing. And you get the benefit of MITRE's attack evaluations program by just making a good decision about what it is that you're willing to buy, right? And stuff, right? So, I mean, like you said, it's like what you all are trying to do is lift all boats up, right?
Yeah.
And if you have money to make investments, then you can do your own research using your methodologies and such and stuff, right? So, anyways, so what about what significant changes in the threatscape have you seen in the past few years? Is there any like emerging attack techniques that you're concerned about for organizations that organizations might be overlooking? I mean, I already brought up browsers, so you can't really, you can agree with me, but
no, I absolutely, no, 100% on that front. And it's interesting to see how that's, the reaction to that. There's also sort of an interesting disconnect too on the like credential harvesting aspect, and then the attack happening at a different time, and sort of this ecosystem that has, these industries within the adversaries that have kind of grown and become more mature. And part of that then is, we talked about the unmanaged device aspect, and we talked about cloud. I think also a lot of these living off the land type techniques are difficult because it very much looks like normal behavior, and that makes it increasingly more difficult to see. If you see a binary being downloaded and having certain API calls, it can be very explicit that this is malicious. This combination of tactics or techniques. Why is this software doing this? When it's a lot of these living off the land type techniques of using commands or actions that are very typical. That's a lot harder to see. And so that goes from maybe some of those lower indicators to really having to see what the connection and the correlation between the behaviors are in order to create that story. I think that's a challenging one, and is going to be increasingly challenged, but that's one that we try to focus on too in the evaluation.
Yeah, I think that, kind of going back into the prioritization of your security program objectives, right? You're probably going to see more attackers that are sending you PDFs or links to your environment through phishing attacks, and defending on phishing attacks and those kinds of problems are probably going to be more worth a less mature organization's time than for example, living
some exotic,
exotic APT kind of thing that's looking for particular kind of targets. You kind of have to think about, like, are you in this scope? And I think a lot of enterprises are in that scope. There definitely would be, especially for ransomware. If you're a big enough organization and they get use living off the land techniques to kind of traverse your environment, learn what's going on, they're going to do that so they can evade detection. Hopefully, you're improving your environment, but it's difficult. There's lots and lots of different things that people could be doing. And the more people you have, the weirder events look. Because I mean, just humans are somewhat chaotic in how they use products. It's so hard to tell everything. I mean, I remember one incident that I was investigating. That I felt like we were just chasing rabbits down holes. It's like we would chase it, like, this looks weird, and we would chase that rabbit, and we would be chasing this other rabbit, and everything looked weird. Then we'd find out that it was just normal user behavior for this application. And when you have 100,000 employees or whatever, 40,000 or 30,000, there's lots and lots of little rabbit holes to go. And if you think that, and that's complicated, just watching like normal behavior, then trying to pick out anomalous behavior.
Yeah.
By an actor that's using, those techniques, that's a tough one.
Yeah. And I think, on ransomware too, it's like, what's the difference between me encrypting a file and sharing it with you, and me, encrypting it and exfilling it? You know,
Right.
a lot.
No.
Is it a file transfer? Is it an exfil? I mean, these are, and all these security companies are also making a weighted decision here too of, do you allow it or do I impact potentially this organization's business function by stopping it? So it's a difficult challenge, and so that's why I think there's this continuation of it.
Sure. I think your zip file is a great example, because I mean, so many companies are like, hey, we got to do something to secure it, but we need to move files and stuff to our customer.
Yeah.
And it's like, great, encrypted zip, that's better than not encrypted, just sending, my social security number in a clear Gmail. Right.
Right.
So it's like, you're balancing your risks one way or the other. Right.
Yeah.
What about AI? How is AI impacting your attack evaluations? I mean, we always have to talk about AI.
Yeah, I think there's a couple different levels that we see it. I mean, there is sort of the AI models themselves, and I'll kind of put that off to the side. But in terms of like an attack evaluation, we see it even with the detections and the correlation. I mean, it's previously there's a lot of rule sets and heuristics to come up with that detection. And then some of those are being replaced with AI, and then others are being sort of a hybrid model where there's these rules and heuristics lying underneath, and then AI is kind of put on top, either to add additional context or to present that information. So that's been very interesting, and how that performs, is I think getting better and better. There's also, in terms of even just internally, we use AI to ensure no PII goes out in these screenshots and evidence that we release. It is across the board, across the value chain, helping improve things. You also see it, there's reports on the use of it. There's some hypotheticals on the use of AI for attacks, both in just building them and executing them. So those are interesting. I don't think we're quite at the point for us to be emulating those. We probably need to see a few more, real examples of those. And then there's a separate piece about the AI models themselves. That's not something we've done explicitly, but it is a very interesting, piece for the future.
Yeah, I think that typically on the AI attack side, right, we're seeing that things might be getting faster. Like, going from a POC to an exploit might be faster using AI. I mean, that's what the seems like the blogosphere is talking about. But and then maybe they're getting better phishing or better social engineering coming out of it. So when you're executing an attack or you're setting up your infrastructure for an attack, right now we're already talking about millions of attacks per second, that are happening all around the world. I'm not sure that, some actor using AI to make a better social engineering. I don't know if that's really changing how we evaluate myself or how we defend. I feel like we're still dealing with computer science. I still think we're dealing with, same kind of tactics, the same kind of TTPs, where those are being augmented on the weaponization side. I'm not sure that's really changing how we defend yet, but I mean, meaning that I don't think that that's really making a market change in how we what our technology is going to seek to detect and disrupt. But I don't know. I mean, do you think it's changing it, or?
I think there's different levels on which that happens. There's, that how it's aiding. I think that's hard to see, or quantitatively how that's affecting it. And I think there's also the piece about the phishing emails that you brought up. Yes, that they're getting better. That we can even just translate into multiple languages more fluidly. There's harder to detect. There's less sort of these artifacts that even as a standard user reading X number of emails a day that you can pick out that you might have otherwise. So I think those are getting harder. But at least how I see it in terms of like the evaluations and the tools, it's really on the context of the information that's being presented at this point, and giving you an analyst a full more complete picture of what's happening and relevant information. And there's also the aspect of, in terms of defense, there's like kind of the automated piece, but there's also the analyst and being able to investigate, to ask questions, and to get that data back. But you always have to be careful because I don't know, when I use ChatGPT for an itinerary for a trip or something, you still have to double check all that because there's sometimes hallucinations there and other things.
Absolutely, you can't trust links. Check every link that they give you, every source.
Right.
Make sure
exactly.
that's there. Well, what do you think the next frontier for security evaluations be beyond what ATT&CK is currently doing? What do you think that the next frontier is?
I think one of the big aspects that evals, really we should push on is the ICS front. I think it's one that has an incredible risk. We've done one round. I'd like to see that be a frontier that we continue to push on, and it's like a next area. It's very difficult. A lot of manufacturing and things, you can't just push updates all the time. And these are systems that are, they're critical for the continuation of day to day, whether it's drinking water, whether it's power, whether it's, all these things. And so there's a big risk there. There's limited reporting on a lot of these things. But I think that's an area that really could use a lot more attention. A lot of people would get drastically improve society. And then I also think that the AI piece is going to be interesting. Both testing, really testing the models themselves, separate from how they're implemented and integrated. But how do you actually test these models? And is it in a individualized way, or is there a generalized testing that you can do across different types of models?
Mm-hmm. Right. It'll be interesting to see how this progresses. I mean, like you said, I think that for me in the ICS world, two places I worked at, it's kind of were important aspects to it. I mean, I think that, when you get into physical systems and physical IT systems that are being spread out all over the place, it becomes really difficult to update anything.
Yes.
It's like, for example, in an MNO, like a mobile network operator and stuff, you may not own all the places that your antennas are in and those little data centers that are there that move your data back into your big data centers. You can't just go into them every single day and start updating software and then of course, you often worried about, emergency services being available, call 911, those kinds of things. And it's like, you start dealing with this and you don't have good recovery processes, and, it becomes really difficult to kind of just update even what you would think might be a simple system.
Yep.
There's a lot more complexities and policies and regulations around it than you would expect there to be. And then, so it's not like working in an enterprise at all. In a lot of aspects, right? It's like we don't worry about updating a Windows box on John's desktop because John gets impacted in case he just goes to help desk and gets a new laptop. But you do that in a manufacturing floor, someone got hit with a machine, right? And so you just
the lines down,
yeah. So okay, well, anyways, like I said, it'll be interesting because I think the hardest part is actually working with the vendors on. And them having good ways of doing it. And when it's all said and done, even though there's ICS and there's ICS everywhere and we depend on it greatly, I don't feel like there's that many vendors and there's that many deployments that are out there. Right. What I mean? It's not like you have a billion Windows boxes and you have lots and lots of test cases and stuff that are being used in a certain way. It's way more chaotic. So it'll be interesting where you go with that. I'll be watching for sure because I think that's actually going to be a bigger problem in the U.S., especially if we really want to push manufacturing back into the U.S. How are we going to do that effectively? There's going to be a lot more computers involved, I think.
Yeah, and it affects all types of systems, and that boundary between IT and OT is converging and integrating, and so it poses a unique risk and an opportunity, and so
sure,
yeah.
All right. Well, let me, as the director of the program, how much of your work is technical as opposed to management and administration?
That's a great question. there's technical can mean many things. I think maybe you're meaning in terms of cybersecurity technical, but it is interesting that this role covers everything from like go to market, finance, people management, product direction, all these pieces, and there is a technical aspect to all that, whether that's the financial analysis, market analysis, just like what's the a lot of market consolidation pieces. There's all these different factors in having the pulse. And I use a lot of software background, even just to check, get updates on our project tracking, from everything. It's because we are so lean as a nonprofit. There's no world in which I am not deep in the weeds on the evaluation, on the emulation, on the infrastructure pieces. But it certainly is a balance between that and the relationship side. And so to me, it's great. But yeah, it ebbs and flows, I think, throughout the year as well.
Right. Well, I think you're doing technical, your product is a technical product when it's all said and done, right?
Yes, very much
lots of facts and stuff that need to be figured out. So, your balance is...
And it's hard, and I very much rely on. We have a great team. We have the head of the CTI for all of MITRE is head of CTI for evals, head of Adversary Emulation is the lead on our team as well. But there are so many different distinct technical capabilities that go into Adversary Emulation. The CTI, the infrastructure, the detection, the malware development. I cannot be an expert in all of those. It's so many different disciplines. So it is great that we have such a good, deeply technical team to be able to bring these evaluations each year.
Great. And if you could give one piece of advice to security leaders trying to make sense of vendor evaluations and claims, what would it be?
Yes. Take it with a grain of salt, but don't ignore them entirely. I think it's very interesting, the claims on what they're pushing or what they're signaling to you as well on what they find what they're interested in or what they see as success. So, if it's just detection coverage, what are they not saying as well? But if they're really pushing on this, the low false positive piece, it's interesting. Go validate that. Every single one of those marketing things should have a link to the evals results, and it's should be easily verifiable. It's all on our website. And then if you have any further questions, we're always available. You can reach out to us, and we're happy to help take the time to walk through anyone's questions on the results.
William, thank you for joining my Be Fearless podcast here and sharing, your experience with your attack evaluations program. It's been great talking to you. I learned a lot.
Likewise. Yeah. Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
Yeah,
this has been super interesting. Yeah.